Hi, I'm Andrew, and this is Blaster Breakdown. Today, an auto Stryfe. I'll show you how I installed the Blasterlife Crank Slide Full Auto Kit, which has given me a rate of fire of 10 darts per second. With the worker metal cage, smooth wheels, and Neo-Hellcat motors, I'm getting 150 FPS with short darts, making this a perfect blaster for Superstock events. Technically, this one belongs to my spouse, so I guess this is the Blasterlife Wife Stryfe. Before we start though, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to like if you enjoy my content. Alright, let's have a look inside. Okay, so this is what the Stryfe looks like as it was at the beginning. So it's built for short darts. I've got the extended artifact pusher in place here, and here's a worker 41.5mm metal cage. I've got smooth worker wheels, and the motors are Neo-Hellcats. So lots of power there, and that was giving us a really neat 150 FPS with the short darts that we use at our events. So that part of the blaster I'm not going to touch. Down here, I remember I did this the night before an event, so it was a bit of a rush job and it's a bit messy, not my usual quality, but that's just a nice 15 amp clicky switch and a standard semi-auto setup. Now this pusher section is going to come out, and that's where the gearbox motor and the other components will go in. There'll also be additional switches here and here. Now the firing switch sits down here, and this mechanical lock is going to be in the way. I usually like to keep the mechanical lock in place just so that somebody doesn't accidentally pull the trigger when the flywheels aren't running. Only if the switch is activated can you actually pull the trigger. However, in this case, I'm going to wire it so that the pusher motor won't be able to run and activate the pusher unless the flywheels are spinning. I don't actually need this physical lock. So this plastic piece I had cut and glued in. I'll just pop that off and we'll remove that piece entirely. So then even if somebody does pull the firing trigger without the rev trigger activated, the pusher motor won't have any power, and so the pusher still won't spin. So a little bit of work to do there. This section will come out, of course, and in place we will fit this pusher motor. So this is the full metal gearbox, and I've swapped out the original motor for a Fang revamped. Now the motor shaft needs to be trimmed a few millimeters. There's a piece that you can print that's a guide to show you how short to cut it. So I'll straight swap out the original pusher motor for Fang revamp. Need to do a bit of cutting in this plastic molding for the slightly different shape of the Fang revamp motor, but mostly it fits pretty neatly. The other thing that you need to do is this axle here needs to be trimmed down a few millimeters. Again, there's a guide piece in the file set that you can print that slips over, and then you just cut or grind it down to the right height. And I've already fixed the crank wheel, and you can see it's quite flush there. The other thing that needs to happen was there's a couple of knobs here and here that I've cut down and smoothed flat, but otherwise that part is ready to go. So this piece holds one switch down here, that's the firing trigger, and this gearbox mounting has holes that hold the cycle control switch. So I'm not using all of the components in the file set because I've got the rev trigger all ready to go. Another point to show is that this arm that connects the motor to the pusher has these ball bearing sets that I've just pressed in at either end. So that ensures nice, smooth motion. Okay, let's undo some pieces. Now, we can see this piece will fit just there. Okay, it turns out there actually is a little bit of extra work I need to do here. This bit of plastic here I need to cut away. Yeah, that's just going to fit. I'll just apply a dab of glue. Okay, let's talk about this mounting plate now. So it fits up the top here. There is a bit of shell cutting that I needed to do. So a little piece at the top here, and then smoothing out a line here. What that does, it allows space for this mounting piece to fit the top there, and the gearbox to sit flush against here, actually, like so. Now, the mounting plate has this hole and this little divot that fit into this screw post and this little bump that holds a little circuit board in the original wiring configuration. So that fits over like so. And then the gearbox sits in place like that. And that's why we need to grind off these little knobs. And in fact, there was one other plastic bit that went over here that I've smoothed that off. That'll sit like so, and we'll put screws through this bit and also this hole. And they'll go through these holes in the mounting piece. So I won't put those in place yet because I want to wire up the motor first. And the final thing to attach then is the cycle control switch, and so that just sits in these mounting points. When the spinning cog comes around and presses, that's where we get our cycle control action. Okay, so I can go ahead and wire this up now. I've got my original positive coming through to this switch. Now the easiest thing might be to just hook into this red wire that goes to the flywheels to give them power when the rev trigger is pressed. And I'll connect that to the normally open pin, which is in the center. So I'll just jump on there. And that'll ensure that this firing trigger has power only when the rev trigger is pressed and the flywheels are spinning. And then the common tab will go to our pusher motor. The normally closed tab of this switch will come from the common for the cycle control switch. I'll talk about that in a moment after I've wired this first switch up. Okay, so this firing trigger is now wired up and it fits nicely to be activated by the trigger. Now, as I mentioned, the center tab, which is normally open, now gets power from the rev trigger when that's pressed. And that comes straight from the LiPo through this bottom switch. The yellow wire is the common tab, and that goes to our pusher motor positive. So when the rev trigger is pressed and the firing trigger is pressed, then the pusher motor will get power through the yellow wire. Now the last switch to wire up is the cycle control switch, which sits at the back here, and that will determine whether the pusher motor gets power or not when the firing trigger is released. So when the firing trigger is released, the yellow wire will take to the pusher motor whatever the white wire comes through the normally closed tab of this switch here. So the white wire will connect to the common tab, which is up here. Then the way we want the cycle control switch to work is when the pusher is forward, so the wheel is on this side, we want the pusher motor to get enough power until it returns with the pusher back. So when this switch is in this state, this normal state, the normally closed tab, we want to come from battery positive. When it gets around to kind of the position it is here, and that switch will be pressed, then the normally open tab will be connected to the white instead. That normally open tab, we want to connect to the battery negative, so we have motor braking, and that'll stop the pusher motor when the pusher is in a rear position. So normally open will go to the battery negative, normally closed will go to the battery positive, and common will go to the firing trigger via this white wire. So I'll go and do that now. The last thing then will be to connect the pusher motor negative tab to battery negative. We'll come back and see what it looks like. Okay, and here we are with the wiring up finished. So cycle control switch, as mentioned, the white wire is the common. So this will either be positive or negative to the firing trigger, and so to the pusher motor, depending on whether this wheel is forward with the pusher forward or back with the pusher back. And we want the motor to be braked, so get negative when the pusher is back. So that's why negative is the normally open and the positive is the normally closed. Now, one thing I want to say is because I'm adapting this to an existing mod, the wiring here is nowhere near as neat as I would normally like it to be. Down here, hooking into the positive, here and here. Because I was connecting to existing wires, I couldn't apply heat shrink without cutting and reconnecting everything. So what I'm going to use at these points where I've joined in is this liquid electrical tape. So I can just squeeze a bit of that around these joins, and that'll give me a good, safe seal. So I'll go and do that now. I'll let it dry, and we'll come back and tuck everything away and put this all together. Okay, we're just about done now. You can see my wiring's a bit neater. the liquid E-tape has covered up these joints nicely, so that's good. I'm running my wires mostly through this channel here, and what I'm just going to do, I've drilled a couple of holes underneath there, as you can see, and I've just got this little cable tie, so I want to keep these out of the way of the pusher, so I'm just going to tidy them up just a fraction. Is okay, so if that sits flat, yeah, that allows that to move smoothly. Okay, that keeps that all out of the way. A couple of other little things I've did is on the inside of the mounting plate, I've put some super glue to hold it in place against the top of this plastic molding, and also a dab on the underside as well. So along with the mounting screw, that should give a little bit of additional stability. While I was at it, I glued this tactical rail nub in there too, because why not? You only ever lose them. So cycle control switch is good. That's all wired up. My firing switch is wired up. I can put my trigger in. I like to use this return spring as well. The lever arm for this firing trigger, you can see I've bent it a little so it sticks more that way. The reason I did that is so that there's even less travel before the switch is engaged. Another thing I've done is remove the cover for the electronic and manual magazine locks that sit in place here. I needed the extra space for this pusher to slide all the way forward, otherwise it would hit against a screw that was sitting here. So that wasn't doing anything, but it's gone now. Otherwise, all my wiring is done now, and I can show you how it works. Now, always test your circuits with alkaline batteries. I've already done that, so I'm happy plugging a LiPo in. Now you can see as soon as I plugged it in, this switch wasn't pressed, and so the pusher motor got power until this wheel got around to press the cycle control switch to brake the motor, which is exactly what we want. So flywheels. And you know, if I pull the trigger, nothing happens. If the flywheels aren't spinning, the pusher motor can't get power, but when it is, there you can see every time I release the trigger, the pusher motor finished with the wheel in the back position and this switch pressed. Actually, I did notice one point where it didn't quite stop and rolled around a second time. So what I can do about that is just give this a bit of a bend. So now that angle will ensure that this switch is actually pressed for a little more of each rotation before this part of the wheel slips off this lever. Let's test that. There's one more just at the end then. So you can see when this wheel finishes towards the end of the lever, that angle ensures that the button is still pressed. Okay, the next thing is putting together the pusher. So the pusher is one main piece, tip glues in. The long dart version is basically the same as the short dart, other than the additional length. And this arm comes in three sizes. So this is 36.5 millimeters. There's 36, there's 37. I presume that's for fine tuning for performance if there's slight differences in tolerance. I've gone with the middle length. If I need to use the longer or the shorter, I can just swap those over. And you can see the ball bearings that I've pressed in place. There's one either end. Now these are held in place with a little M3 screw and a washer in between the two printed pieces. That screw is firm, but it's not clamping tight, so you can see that still spins freely, which is what we want. Do the same thing to connect to here. And the final thing is this spacer piece that sits over this screw post, and that just holds the pusher so it doesn't jump up or get down. I'm just reusing these screws that were in the original semi-auto configuration. Okay, now let's test this out. We have enough clearance here when I load a Talon magazine in. Let's just dump a mag and see what it looks like. I'll also put up a count of the shots per frame, so that'll let us know how many darts per second this one is firing. Well, that went fantastic. Really pleased with that. Not a crazy rate of fire. The pusher motor braking worked fine. So I think the final thing to do is identify where on the inside of the left side of the shell we need to make a bit of space for this mechanism to move. So in the build guide instructions, it suggests putting the shell together and running it a little to see where the wear marks are, and subsequently grinding those down on the inside here. Whether that's necessary or not, well, why don't we just try it? I won't screw it together, but if I just hold this, now that seems like good advice, because I could actually feel the inside rubbing, and we can see here this circle which corresponds to the tip of this screw as it goes around. I think maybe that's the only point. You see that? So around here, also a little bit there. So I'll get the Dremel out, I'll do a bit of smoothing, but if that's the only moving part that's rubbing, then that's pretty good news. Okay, so with my Dremel and then sandpaper, I've created a bit of space here, and I ran it until it didn't seem to be rubbing any longer. So I think this one's pretty much good to go now. Some final thoughts before I screw it all together. So this is a fantastic set of files. The most important ones, of course, are the mounting piece to hold the pusher motor and the cycle control switch, of course, the wheel, the connecting arm, and the pusher itself with this spacer. So that's kind of the heart of this kit. With the gearbox assembly, that's what makes it run. The additional components for making adjustments to the pusher motor, so the spacer to trim the motor axle, as well as the gearbox axle to the right length, they're useful. The pieces to mount the switches for the rev trigger and the firing trigger are useful, but not necessary. You could mount those yourselves. In fact, that's exactly what I started with this 15 amp Omron clone already mounted. So of course I didn't need the piece that holds one of these smaller switches there. So where that could be useful, of course, is if one of these smaller switches wasn't enough to carry the current that more powerful motors, such as the Neo-Hellcats I've got in here, draw. And in fact, recently I did have one of these small switches burn out in another blaster using Neo-Hellcats. So that's where I'd rather have this bigger switch there. Of course, there's different mounting options for this. It was just lucky that I had enough space as it was to fit this trigger switch here. So yeah, all the components in the kit are useful. This section is the key. That's the critical part. And I just think it's a fantastic design. I know other very experienced modders use this a lot and are very happy with it. So I feel a bit slack actually that I've never tried it before, but I'm pleased that I have now. Okay, I'm not going to bother with a chronograph test. I know this hits 150 FPS with short darts, so that's fantastic. And the rate of fire I put up just before, showing how many darts per second we can expect. So we can just jump straight out and do a firing demo now. Okay, here we are 50 feet from the target as per usual. I've got a couple of mags of Worker Red Gen 2s queued up ready to go. At 10 darts per second, I'll see how I go with getting single shots and maybe some short bursts, and then we'll just up a mag for fun. My first couple of shots there were high, but the rest were right on target. Let's see how 18 in a hurry goes. Oh yeah, that's fun. Let's have a look now at some gameplay footage from a recent Brisbane area Nerf group event. So as a Superstock event, the cap is 150 FPS, which this blaster is just perfect for. So there we see lots of tags, heaps of fun to run. Couldn't be happy with the performance of this blaster, in particular the Blasterlife Full Auto Kit. Please leave any questions and comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.